going to vote it.
Good morning, everybody. We've got a full room this morning, so I'd like to welcome you to the Education and Children's Social Care Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As usual, I need to advise you that the meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's YouTube site. Item 2, we haven't received any apologies, and I believe that we do have a full committee this morning. Item 3, declarations of interest. I need to remind members that they need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests and or any other registrable interests. If any interests are declared, members do need to confirm what sort of interests they are declaring. Are there any interests to declare?
Chair. Sorry.
Yes, Councillor Hughes.
I am not declaring an interest, Chair, and I noticed that the minutes recorded me at the last meeting of declaring a non-pecuniary interest. I didn't declare a non-pecuniary interest in Sendias. I don't have an interest in Sendias. So can I insist that the minutes are corrected to show that my declaration was made in the interest of transparency?
That is a non-pecuniary interest.
That is a non-pecuniary interest.
I'm saying it's not a non-pecuniary interest. And what I must object to, Chair, is having the minutes adopted after the event. If somebody wants to challenge my assertion, then I suggest they do so through whatever channels they do it through.
Thank you.
I do not have an interest in Sendias, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. That is noted.
Thank you.
As a matter of procedure for the meeting, that would need to be corrected under the minutes of the meeting. I think we're just looking at declarations of interest for this meeting at the moment.
It just seemed a relevant point to pick it up because
Yeah,
Okay.
appreciate it.
I have not
We just
declared
need to minute it under the right section.
Right. Are there any other interests to declare? No, thank you very much. Item 4 is the action notes and tracker. So members have got the action notes from the 19th of October in their packs. So we need to agree those as well as noting the action tracker. I know that Councillor Hughes, you have a point to raise on the notes of the last meeting, which you've just outlined. So can we note those under this item?
yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Have members got anything to raise under the action notes? No, thank you. And are members happy to note the action tracker? Thank you very much. Item 5, happy to welcome Andy Caldrick, Chief Executive. I'm looking, we haven't got David Stringfellow.
The Executive Apologies Chair is embroiled in an interesting inspection of our adoption service that's taking place this week and concluding this afternoon.
Thank you, Andy. And Dion McAndrew from the Children's Trust. So welcome. Very pleased to have you join us. Members have had the slides and the report. Andy, we're hoping that we will show the slideshow, but that you won't go through every single point on there because it's quite a detailed presentation, but you will highlight all of the main areas for us if you're happy with that.
So do you want to do the same thing in relation to the report?
Yes, please, Andy.
We'll aim to trouble you for no more than 15 minutes so that there's time for questions and answers. Thank you for inviting us. It's good to be back. One of our regular kind of updates on the work of the Children's Trust, which is coming to the end of its first term. So in 2018. The council has a contract with us that runs for 10 years, but has a review point at 5. So we're in the midst of that contract review now, and the council will need to make a decision about what it does by the end of March. So we go into the second term of that contract smoothly, and those conversations, negotiations are going very well. There are no problems emerging in those discussions. I've highlighted in the report that precedes the slide deck that we face considerable challenges in terms of growth in demand for services, for children's social care services across the city, and significant change and growth in the complexity of that demand. And the complexity of that demand, coupled with the challenges around the placement sufficiency situation and the market around placements for vulnerable children in care, are both nationally recognised issues. So an independent review of social care nationally was published earlier this year, written by Josh McAllister, and government has indicated it will provide a response to that now. It highlights the same challenges, the challenges around workforce and the extent to which social work agencies are paying significantly higher rates to acquire social workers, which makes it hard for us to compete, and the challenges around placement markets. Some of that's impacted by changes in statute and requirements of Ofsted. I'll put some of those in the slide. Despite the challenges, we think we're making good progress. The front door remains strong and has a very strong multi-agency presence. So within our kind of children's advice and support service and our multi-agency safeguarding hub, we not only have police and health, we have education, we have domestic abuse specialists, we have housing. It's a very rich and rounded front door that enables us to make good decisions when children first present needing where they've been referred, in need of a social work assessment and possibly a social work service. Our Empower You hub, about which Dion will say more later, is our response, again, another strongly multidisciplinary response to the exploitation and contextual safeguarding challenges in the city. And that's something that we've built since the trust came into existence, and it's doing some really interesting work, not only in relation to individual children being referred, but in the work we're doing in with communities, with carers who are we're working with as partners trying to solve some of those challenges. I've covered in the report where we are in relation to our children's homes. They're regulated on a very regular basis, and we've had some fluctuation. One of the homes is currently inadequate, but the inspectors have been back since they judged it so and have seen good progress. And one is judged to require improvement and one's good. I've referred in the report, and again come to that in the slideshow, to the fact that our performance around children in care in terms of the rate is equivalent. That's to say, well, actually, children and their families, therefore our rates at which children come into care is considerably lower than our neighbours, lower than our regional neighbours, and lower. If that wasn't the case, then our financial challenge and the city's financial challenge would be considerably greater than it already is. And I've talked about growing our own residential offer to try and deal with some of those emergency situations that come our way. In the 5 years that we've existed, we've been quite heavily inspected already. So we had a full service inspection in 2018. We've had, since 2018, we've had 2 fostering inspections. We're in our second adoption inspection. The youth offending service has been inspected and is to be inspected again next month. And our children's homes are inspected on an annual basis. We've also had 2 focused Ofsted visits, one looking at the front door, one looking at our services for children in care, and a test inspection where Ofsted, this was an unreported inspection where they came in to test some new software that they were using. They used it as an opportunity to test our care services. And we think that what all of those inspections are telling us is that services are improving. Our fostering services are good. Our adoption services have been good since 2019. Things will remain at least for the outcome of the inspection that we'll get later today. Our next full ILACS inspection, so that's inspection of the whole service that leads to a new judgment. We're currently judged to require improvement. What we think will take place in the first half of next year. And that'll be the kind of critical point at which we'll have an external regulated test of progress being made. I've identified in my report a number of areas where we've made progress. I won't go into those. I've referenced some of them. But essentially what we're trying to illustrate is that since we've broadened and deepened our offer for children and families in the city, one of the key developments has been the council's investment in early help, because that's reaching thousands of children and families across the city who might otherwise end up needing a statutory social work intervention. And meet that need earlier, it's better for those families and better for the state. I've highlighted performance in relation to the key performance indicators that are in the contract that we have with the council, and I've set out the priorities against which we're working for this year. And I've also described some of the risks and challenges that we'll probably get into more in the conversation as we go through the slides. So I'm very happy to pause there in relation to the written report you have. See if there are any questions, otherwise we'll on the slides and beyond the exploitation.
I think if we go on to the slides, please, Andy, and then we'll do all the questions at the end, if that's okay.
Of course. Leon, hand over to you.
Thank you, Andy. The committee's asked today around the involvement of partners in terms of attempts to reduce the risk of criminal exploitation towards our children. And it's interesting about the role of your partners, because working together 2000 has been very much for exploitation of children on the map, both in the multi-sectoral in terms of this is a form of abuse. So we know that in the city and across the region and indeed nationally, we have a significant issue with exploitation of both types. There is a definition which is in the slide for you. I'm not going to read it out. I know you're very capable of reading through that yourself. Well, that's what's been agreed across the West Midlands, because there's a lot of work across the region in collaboration with Birmingham in terms of pooling together our resources and our intelligence in terms of how to actually tackle this going forward. How it manifests itself in the city of Birmingham, when we talk specifically at criminal exploitation, I'm sure many of you have heard of the activity called county lines, where children are trafficked across the country to distribute and deal drugs at behalf of organised crime groups. They're kept in houses where they're fed very little food. They will be forced to conceal drugs internally. That could be Class A drugs, heroin, cocaine. You could imagine the safeguarding concerns around that if one of those packages actually erupted inside that young person. They will be made to pay off debt bondage towards organised crime groups, and they're forced to continue working for them. And if they don't, sometimes their families are threatened to. And sometimes we see a lot of children coming through the door of the trust because of the risk being so significant to them. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide. In terms of the picture in Birmingham, we're concerned that our numbers of children reported in for criminal exploitation are very low. So I think there's approximately 117,000 10 to 17-year-olds in Birmingham at the moment. We've identified 500 children in total who were at risk of either criminal or sexual exploitation. Of those, we know that the 360 were specifically criminal exploitation. And within that, that's usually young black males, usually black or minority ethnic groups. If we're looking at sexual exploitation, just as an aside, that's usually young white female of girls. In terms of overall exploitation, sexual and criminal, we don't see anything particularly different in terms of spread across the city. But if we're looking at criminal exploitation, we're primarily looking around the northwest central part of the state, just converging with from Birmingham east. So the challenges are significant in terms of we feel that there's an unknown risk out there within the community, similar to when we looked at the incidents in Rochdale and Rotherham around sexual exploitation, where it had gone unrecognised for years and agencies haven't taken action.
So what we're actually doing in Birmingham at the moment, as Andy mentioned, we do have what we call the Empower You, which is somewhat of a catalyst really for multi-agency working. There's been strong investment from Birmingham Children's Trust, the police, education. I've put some staff in there now. We have health staff on board. And within that, we receive notifications of every child who's been missing within the authority. And we will follow that up to understand what that missing is about. And then we will understand whether or not that is around a child who's been exploited and trafficked somewhere. And we can work to disrupt the activity of the people involved in that particular activity around that young person. There is a number of strategic boards. So we have the Contextual Safeguarding Board, which governs Empower You. We have our Violence Board, newly named Violence Board, which sits under the Community Safety Partnership. And that very much drives the activity around criminal exploitation and also associated serious youth violence. And I'm sure that all members have been cited on the events in the around serious incidents involving all views within the paper, but actually we're talking around children. And just to clarify, often that serious youth violence is related to the exploitation of children. So children would have been groomed to deal drugs on behalf of organised crime groups. They then get into turf wars with other young people, and then at the behest of adults, they will then commission acts around criminality. So a lot of this is actually linked. Sometimes it's quite difficult to draw a line through the two. So we engage. Our key partners are actually the community. As Andy alluded to, we do an awful lot of work with parents. We see them as our safeguarding partners. They understand better than what we do, what's going on in the community and the challenges around them. We work with Community Safety Partnership, British Transport Police in terms of children on trains, identifying them. So I'm sure many of you use trains often. Keep your wits about you next time if you see a teenager on there. It's about time of day for him to be travelling, and he's in possession of 2 mobile phones. One of them looking like a very cheap throwaway phone. There's a good chance that he'll be in traffic. On behalf of organised crime group. And you will see this because I've seen this myself just in terms of my community. We do community walkabouts. Parents show us the places of concerns. They will show us actually where children are hiding guns as part of their involvement in exploitation. We've been involved with target hardening particular places around CCTV, etc. We've been working with our partners across the region to set up reciprocal housing schemes so that we can actually relocate families who have been targeted by these groups of individuals. So there's a lot of work going on, a lot more work to do in this area of work. So just in terms of next steps and our priorities going forward, there is a strategy which is in draft form, which is due to be presented to the Contextual Safeguarding Board in mid-January. And within that, you know, there's 2 strands really. How do we make Birmingham a very unattractive place for organised criminals to function? So there's something there, isn't there, around the awareness raising, the stigmatisation, the disruption, the policing. And to do that, we need to have a really good proper profile so that we understand the issue, and that needs to be based around who are the victims, perpetrators, and where are the locations that are actually concerned. We know that the other strand to that, you know, we make Birmingham an unattractive place, but we also need to make it a very safe place for our children and families to live. So there has to be a strand around prevention, early intervention, and then where we can make immediate responses where that's required. So that's going to involve, again, awareness raising, but strengthening the workforce around their responses, working with some of the wider initiatives that are going on in schools at the moment, such as the Safe Task Force, which is linked to serious youth exploitation. And we're going to continue to work within the Empower You Hub around developing different ways of working with children who are subject to crime or abuse. So that's it in a nutshell in terms of the picture. We have rafts of data and rafts more information here, but we're conscious that we've got a small slot. So if anybody does require any additional information further, I'll be happy to email that through.
Thank you. And in David's absence, I'll quickly cover off mental health and the complexity of care and the impact that's having. So we're not, on mental health, first of all, we're not the primary provider of mental health in the city. As you know, that's Forward Thinking Birmingham, which sits as part of the Children's Hospital structure, although, you you'll all be aware that there's considerable structural change happening within the NHS, and it looks as if children's mental health and adult mental health will end up in a provider collaborative. And we're still trying to work out what that means, because of course one of the things we're really clear about is that the NHS mental health offer for children and young people needs to have its connection to place and to community as well as to adults. So that's work in progress and it's developing. So what we do it is illustrated in these two slides. We have a dedicated emotional health and therapeutic service for children care and care leavers, because they're often a group that get missed and yet have considerable needs in relation to the trauma that they will have experienced, etc. And we think that helps us to maintain children in care in stable placements. And of course, that's a critical indicator of success for them in terms of their outcomes and their life chances. We've worked very hard with Forward Thinking Birmingham to build this service called Intensive Residential Outreach Care, which now supports some of our caregivers, particularly in children's homes, in delivering good support to children with complex emotional and mental health needs, and to provide the right sort of therapeutic containment that enables them to be well cared for. And again, it's contributing to stability. I think it's well known that mental health, children's mental health services nationally and locally have been under colossal pressure, particularly since the pandemic. And we certainly experienced that. And we also experienced the impact of the reduction in the number of tier 4 mental health beds that there are available nationally. So that there are, we would argue that there are children we are caring for now who would once upon a time have been subject to a mental health intervention in a mental health bed. That's a challenge, and we'll go on working with our partners to address that. Within the early help offer that the council commissions, there are two early intervention mental health offers. One is the STIC programme, that's working across most, if not all, of our schools now, promoting identification, early intervention, and COOF, which is our online mental health service. And some of those have proved very popular for young people because there's something slightly safer about it being less immediately personal. And it's been very widely accessed. So I then come on to talk about cost and complexity in relation to placements. And there are a number of graphs that I'm not going to talk through, other than to say that what we're seeing is that the rate of children in care in Birmingham is going up, no more than we anticipated it would, and less than is the case in most authorities. But the complexity and the cost, therefore, has gone up exponentially in ways that we hadn't been able to anticipate, because we're seeing significant above inflation rises. And some of that's to do with legislative intervention, so a change around an expectation into next year that supported accommodation, supported living for older young people would become regulated. That's led to changes in the way that's provided and is driving costs up. And generally speaking, market failure is a problem. And what a number of providers say is that the commercial or economic impact of Ofsted is increasingly driving decisions about placements that a provider will accept. Because if they take a really difficult, really challenged young person and it creates disruption in their home, and then Ofsted come and inspect that home, they might get a notice to cease trading, and that has a significant commercial impact on them as a commercial entity. Ofsted are aware of that, and nationally there's significant awareness of it. So that's the kind of broader context. On slide page 48, 78, that slide just illustrates what I've already said, which is that despite the challenges, we do better than our statistical neighbours in terms of children coming into care. And we've built what we believe is a substantial and significant offer that supports children to stay in their own families and supports families to take responsibility to make decisions for their children, so that we see more and more children living with a family member who might otherwise be living in care. And we think that's a good thing, and the research and the evidence suggests that that's a good thing too. And one of the other factors that's driving our increase is asylum seeking young people. And one of the phenomena that we're seeing is a substantial increase in the number of young people who are turning up in adult hotels in the city. So they've been assessed at the south coast, largely, because these are young people arriving by boat. They've been assessed as adults, moved into an adult hotel, and then they've declared their children, and some of them very obviously are. So then they become children in care, and we find carers to look after. Again, it's a national phenomenon, and we all know the kind of coverage that asylum activity and immigration is getting. But each time the Home Office opens a new hotel in Birmingham and fills it with asylum-seeking adults, there will be a portion who will turn out to be children. And as well as that, we receive young people through the National Transfer Scheme, where they're allocated out to local authorities, and we still see some spontaneous arrivals as well. So the next couple of slides just really illustrate what I've talked about in terms of the challenges of the market and the way those challenges are driving the cost of care. But the good news for the city is that despite those challenges, we're still delivering care at a unit cost that's better than the core cities with whom we compare ourselves. But it is without doubt a challenged context that we're operating. Shut up now, Chair.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Dion. That was really useful, and I'm very grateful for you to have flown through that to allow plenty of time for questions. I was a little bit remiss at the beginning that I didn't introduce Councillor Tilsley and Councillor Pritchard, who have joined us today from they're members of the Children and Young People's Mental Health Inquiry. So they've joined us today, and I'm hoping that you will have some questions that you can ask, that you will be able to feed back to your inquiry committee. We've got 2 inquiries ongoing that this committee is part of, so you will know that. And our other one is around child criminal exploitation. So I'm sure that there will be some questions there. So I do ask members to let me know if you want to ask some questions. I've got a couple of questions that I want to ask as well, and I'm going to go first for a change. I normally wait till the end, but I'm going to go first. So just around the challenges in the placement market, Andy, I know that we have had an email exchange with regard to children and young people in unregulated placements. And I know that's something that has been a topic of discussion across social media. So I just wondered whether you could give us a bit of an update there, because I was hoping to have a bit more information come through on that, so that I could share that with the committee. And then just on the growing our own residential offer, and I just wondered how that residential offer would look in terms of size. Are we still supporting a smaller family style residential care setting over a warehouse full of kids? So if you can answer those for me, and then I'll take indications from members. Yeah, please do, Andy.
So I apologise for not including more on the specifics of unregulated, and if you'd like a short paper after the meeting, we can certainly provide that. So the unregulated placements that are most problematic are where we can't find a placement in a registered fostering or residential home for a child under the age of 16. And so we put together a bespoke package of care for them until such time as we can find a regulated placement. Last week, there were, I think, 12 young people, and each one of them has a move-on plan of one sort or another. That number is higher than we'd like and lower than most of our neighbours. So a much smaller authority on our borders was inspected very recently, and they had more than twice the number that we did. But we work constantly to reduce the number. The group of young people about whom there's the most noise nationally are 16 and 17-year-olds living in supported accommodation. And they are not placed in dens of iniquity over which there is no scrutiny or monitoring or quality assurance in the way that it's sometimes being portrayed. They are placements that are acquired from a framework that we use across the West Midlands, which includes an element of quality assurance. And for some of those young people, it's absolutely the right thing for them to live in a semi-independent environment with support. And for others where that's not right, we'll work to move them into a different type of care environment. But that's been a model of care that's existed for a long time. What Ofsted are seeking to do is to increase the range of their regulation so that more of those providers become subject to regulation. The challenge that everybody recognises that in doing that, the likelihood is that it will push up costs that those providers of that care will charge, or rather that accommodation and support will charge more to do it. And nationally, that we know that that's a problem because we are fiscally challenged as a country as well as an authority. But there is no child or young person placed anywhere by Birmingham who are left to their own devices, left to be exploited or manipulated in any way. Every one of those young persons has an allocated social worker, has an allocated independent reviewing officer, and there is quality assurance of the provider who they are living. So that's the context in which that operates.
Thanks, Andy. And just on the asylum placements in adult hotels, what sort of checks and balances do we have in terms of, are we notified that there is a group of refugees or asylum seekers that have been placed in a hotel so that we can go and check to make sure there aren't any children there? Are there any checks and balances in place for that?
It's part of the realm of responsibility.
So we have a dedicated UX team and a couple of times with children team. So as soon as we become aware of that, and how it would usually translate would be that it would be adults in the first instance presenting, but then they will speak to somebody if they actually are a child. We're contacted, we deploy staff out, we start the assessments, we find the appropriate accommodation. So there is a response in place for that.
Okay, thanks, Dion. Councillor Hugh. Oh, sorry, Andy.
You had a second question about residential care?
Oh, yes, I did, around the size of the
Yes,
our offer.
We're not looking for any warehouses. All of our care, the care that we'll be looking to develop will be probably no more than 2 or 3 young people. But the area that we're looking to target are those young people coming in an emergency situation whom we know the least, about whom we know the least, and about whom we need to get to know better in order to be able to plan how they move on or how they move back home, because that's equally possible for some of those young people. So there'll be small units dealing with small numbers of young people. A care model of more than 4 is always going to prove quite problematic.
And yeah, I totally accept that. And I was hoping for that answer, Andy. So thank you for that. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. It seems to be a realistic acknowledgement of the situation we're in. I just wonder, you referred to the number of children in care having risen. Is that a proportionate rise in line with increasing population, or is there more to it than that? You also talk about the increased complexity in need. I'd like some idea of why that's happening. And you also talked about the front door early help. I would like to know just a little bit more about that and the value of it, because it strikes me as potentially the kind of thing that might be subject to budgetary restraints in the future. It strikes me as being particularly valuable, and I would like to know that it will still be there. And finally, there's just one, I've lost the line. It just strikes me as a spooky line where it says, instead the council is exploring the options available in relation to the next contractual term with the trust.
I wonder if you might be prepared to expand on that. Thank you, Chair.
Well, Andy's smiling. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
But it doesn't happen often, Jeff. But it might be more sensible to defer to my left on that last question, because we're I can describe the kind of framework in which the discussions are taking place. But we'll come to that. So if I start at the top, the rate of entry into care is ahead of the rate in growth in population. That's true in Birmingham and almost everywhere else in the country. And both that and the context of complexity, the precise answer to what we're seeing nationally and locally isn't clear. We talk about the potential impact of COVID and children who disappeared from view for a period of time, who've emerged in larger numbers. I worry a lot about the contraction and the focus of mental health services for children and young people and the way they get defined in particular ways. So I hear, the mental health service talks about wanting to be trauma informed, but then tells us that a young person is our responsibility and not theirs because they've got trauma. Fundamentally, all of our children's services across the council, the trust and the NHS need to be better integrated, better joined up and better commissioned. And that's how we'll get to a position where we stop looking at children and working out who's responsible, and we start working out how we come together to meet a child's needs and support their family. That's where we've got to get to. I've been a social worker for a ridiculously long time, and I remember saying, with the change with the development of the ICS, I really hope we seize this opportunity as the point at which we do something fundamentally different and better. It's about wrapping around children and families rather than identifying who's responsible for what. We've done quite a lot of work on articulating the value of early help, and we're as concerned as you because it's supported literally thousands of families across the city, and it's some really innovative and interesting work. So one example would be we have an early help service operating in A&E in the Children's Hospital, so that the problems that are not medical but lead children into acute services, there's somebody on hand that the doctors and the nurses can refer to get help with those other elements in a child's experience. And that's made a huge difference. And of course, now the NHS would like that rolled out into all of the A&Es across the city. And there's a conversation that therefore ensues about who pays. How do we resource that? We think we can illustrate significant cost avoidance. We can't illustrate savings because everything's going up. The numbers coming in is going up, the complexity is going up, and the cost of care is going up. What we can illustrate is if we hadn't had an investment in early help, they would have gone up, all of those would have gone up more. Costs would have been significant as a result. And a lot of that information is available, and again, we'd be very happy to share it if that's helpful. The position with regard to the contract is we had a 10-year contract with a review point after 5 years, but there is still a improvement direction in force from the Department for Education, which continues to mandate that social care in the city should be delivered through the trust. So at this first review point, council's options are limited to reviewing the contract, making the contract better and rolling into the second 5 years, or doing something different with the contract length. So do you want to comment? Because you're, in a sense, my commissioner.
And we're having some good discussions, aren't we, I think, around what would a strategic partnership look like? Because I don't think we do have a traditional commissioner-provider relationship, and nor should we, because this is about how we wrap around all our children. And, Birmingham Children's Trust is as dependent on some services that sit in the council as much as the council is dependent on Birmingham Children's Trust wrapping services round its families. So I think we've got a very special and precious relationship that needs to develop and will develop continually into the relentless focus that we've got on giving the best outcomes and the best services to our children and families in a really difficult environment in terms of cost of living, in terms of the challenges that our families are currently facing, and the challenges the council always has to find resource. So although this is non-statutory, in terms of the early help bit, that's a key part of the whole debate around what will the partnership look like. And they're very positive and kind of empowering conversations to be able to have. So that's where we are, thinking about what will a brilliant strategic partnership look like. Of course, it's a bit more tricky, and a colleague here will attest to that when you get lawyers involved and how that turns into a contract. Thank goodness that isn't my kind of concern. My concern is let's stabilise. The council's now getting many more substantive staff, me included, in the Children's Directorate, and we're all really keen to work in partnership with the Trust to continue to improve things for families.
Yeah, just to echo from the legal services position, I've already met with my colleagues in legal services in the Trust. We've agreed to having a really proactive, flexible relationship. So yes, whilst there's contractual documents actually on day-to-day issues, we want to share information. We want to be part of wider learning. We're all lawyers. We all need training, and it's about understanding the pressures as well. So it's about that value added. And I'm a social care lawyer by profession as well. So it's about two heads better than one in some circumstances. So I've got the advantage of saying, actually, this is the paperwork, but this is exactly what Sue has just said. This is the reality. These are children and families, and that is the absolute priority. So, and my responsibility as well is making sure that the corporate parenting responsibility that everybody has is fully understood, and that in turn supports the Trust in their work and supports our children and young people.
Thanks, Janie. Before I bring Councillor Birmingham in, I just want to see if Councillor McCarthy wants to comment on what's just been discussed.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in 6 months I put this role on. I can't describe the relationship with the Trust as easy, because the issues and the situations we're dealing with are serious and difficult. But it has been straightforward and helpful. We describe the relationship between the City Council and the Trust as close cousins. So it doesn't mean we don't fall out, doesn't mean we don't disagree, but we talk things through and we come back to a situation where we're all working together. And I find that tremendously helpful.
Thanks, Councillor.
So
yeah, of course, Sandy.
The technical answer to the question is that in the first quarter of 2023, the Cabinet will be invited to make a decision about the contract interest, but you're stuck with this for another 5 years.
I'm delighted to hear that.
Okay. Councillor Birmingham.
Yeah, my question was basically on the health in the mental health structure, because it's so important catching somebody. I mean, I know of a personal situation where if you'd been caught at school, certain things wouldn't have happened and they would have been helped much more than when it became a crisis point. With the online safety bill now being watered down, though, I think we've got another challenge that we've got to protect our children from what they see online. It's all very well saying to parents, don't let them go on. You tell a child, especially a teenager, you can't visit that site, they'll be gone there before you've turned your back. So we need to be putting the other side, especially when it comes to self-harm, because it's such a complicated situation. A, why you start doing it. B, the fact that it can be hidden so easily under clothing, and the fact that they only situation where they feel they can't talk to anybody. So that is something that within the early help, I would hope is being, especially in the school situation, being discussed.
I think it's a key feature of the STIC programme, which is fundamentally about delivering information, support and training to frontline staff, teaching and pastoral staff to enable them to respond and to have some kind of recourse to help and advice. And I think in any number of areas, the whole online world is rapidly and fundamentally changing how all of us operate in lots of ways, for good and in more challenging ways. So I agree with you.
I'm going to take the last question from Councillor Murrah.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. It's always good to listen to the work the Children's Trust are doing. I'm a big supporter of the work that you do. I want to focus on the exploitation side because we've talked about the other stuff quite extensively. We're doing an inquiry into this, and I'd really look forward to hearing you guys on there. But I've paused on the slide here where we've got the definition of exploitation, and I'll keep reading it over and over and over again, because I can't stress how much I think this needs to be in the public domain so much, because you said it was like a silent crime, isn't it? It really is. People don't realise when they are being exploited, and more importantly, parents don't realise when their child might be being exploited, particularly the financial one. I think we need to be making parents more aware that if your child is coming home with new shoes, new clothes, expensive iPhones, where did they get this stuff from? And a lot of the time that is not being, they're doing it because they think they're telling them they love them. That's a debt, and that debt eventually needs to be paid back, and eventually that is what results in the violence. And I'm preaching to the choir here, aren't I? But I'm saying it in the public domain. A lot of the time this will be done because they will socially engineer information out of them. So they'll send the clothes to a house and they'll get the address. Well, now I've got your address. They'll find out if you've got any children, how many family members do you have. And often they will make the threats to the family, knowing that you are effectively our property now and you have to do what they say. And just like we have, I'm going to use an analogy here with homelessness. We often talk about homelessness, but we talk about the hidden homeless, sofa surfers, right? Not a lot of people talk about those people who are surfing. And I think this is what, to homeless people, this is kind of like that silent thing on the side, isn't it? That we don't often talk a lot about the actual grooming and exploitation that happens, because I think this probably happens a heck of a lot more than we actually know. And the reason it happens, if we look at the grooming gangs across the country and the reports, what's happened in Telford and Rotherham, it happened because people turned a blind eye to it. And that's why on the last point here, where it talks about when it appears consensual. That's the thing we really, really need to challenge here. How can it be consensual when somebody has an imbalance of power and they're buying all this stuff to a child, and the child is not old enough to know that you are being exploited? And how do you get that child to open up and say, I'm being threatened here and my family? How do you go to your family and tell them your life is in danger and I put your life in danger? And these are the barriers that we really, really need to start challenging down. And so I really want to zone in on that. What is the trust doing? Because I really value the work that you're doing to make this more aware in the public domain so that we can do our best to help individual families prevent this from happening to their children.
Thanks, Councillor Morrell. And I know that you're very passionate about this, as am I, and I share the view that Dion mentioned earlier around, young children and young people are often victims in a lot of the exploitation, because of the exploitation that's going on. So I don't know whether you want to take that one, Dion.
Thank you, Councillor Morrell. What we think of you that you could come and work on our service revolution.
What we're doing at the moment is conversations with the DRP, because this doesn't just exist in Birmingham, so we're taking a regional approach. Really around the comms campaign around it, so we can bring some awareness and education to our community, parents and carers, but also the importance of stigmatisation today. Often, some of the adults who are involved in this have been with the local property community, who's helping out a kid who may have been excluded from school, etc. Got kind of self-worth, not really got a strong sense of belonging anywhere, and they will pull on those vulnerabilities, and they will do the things that you described just there in terms of new trainers, new phones, and the pulling is so simple, in terms of the young person, give them some kind of their own personal use. And you will know, because I've experienced it in quite normalised to let children to smoking have that point where you can even see people on the way to school at 9 o'clock in the morning, wasn't that way when we were actually on, and then they will just appeal again, and then they go this step, and then they go off again. So all these things you're talking about, and then they're paid for doing little bits of work by giving extra new clothes, etc. Parents sometimes know that the children are involved in something and they think actually they're going to get in trouble for it, so they're tied in terms of not reporting to the police. So we really need to bring some stigma. The person who's picking up your son in the Baines Road, not picking them up, isn't a local body or a child leader. So, similarly, years ago, there was a tolerance around drink driving. There was a tolerance around domestic news resulting in that zero tolerance campaign, which is so absolutely agree with you. We need to step up the comms and the campaign around this. And importantly, we need to have a response in place for when those calls do come in.
And are there plans in place to do that, Dion?
Yeah, through the violence reduction partnership. Yeah.
One final point as well.
You'll have to be quick.
Very quickly. Just want to also point out, obviously this is a children's committee, but this also does happen to adults a lot as well. And adults, you know, if you're an adult, I mean, where do you go?
Yeah, we know, especially vulnerable adults.
Yeah.
I'm going to be very lenient with the late hand raising of Councillor Pritchard and Councillor Tilsley, because they have been invited here today, and I did say that they could ask a question.
Yeah, so I'll try and be quick, Chair, and thank you. So Andy, you mentioned about the lack of resource for more serious intervention in terms of mental health and kind of placements. One thing that's already come up in terms of the inquiry we're doing is out of area placements in mental health. So yeah, I'd like to kind of hear a bit more from you about what you think the impact of that, of those out of area mental health kind of placement beds. And we've heard kind of far away as, you know, plan to go and all this sort of stuff. And so to hear a bit more about the impact and any insights you've got on that. Other than the working together better, which you already mentioned, is there anything else you would change in terms of the mental health systems in the city? And finally, you talked about the bringing together young people and adult mental health. Is that going to make things better or worse from what you see in terms of bringing those two together?
So Tilsley, have you got a question as well on this?
First of all, it's a comment, if I may, Chair, that the presentation will be very, very useful to the scrutiny because it does highlight a number of issues. Specifically, I am concerned about the cooperation you're getting from the schools, given that it is such a fragmented system now in the city. Are they responding, academies and all the rest? Are they cooperating? Because this is potentially a major issue for us. And then the issue really of a wraparound, so that we're not worried about whose budget is paying, that it is child-centred as far as care and mental health is concerned. And one or two colleagues around the table will know that I've waxed lyrical about cooperation between the City Council and NHS for the last 25 years, and I'm still doing it now. I'm probably still a voice in the wilderness.
Thank you, Councillor Tilsley. And I do know that the Trust will be coming separately to have a discussion with the inquiry around the points that you're looking at. So I'm not expecting you to go into massive detail, Andy, but if you could just try and pick up on a couple of those points.
Around out of area placements, just because there's been such contraction in the tier 4 beds for children and young people, they can end up anywhere. And that's problematic. And of course, there's the same contraction in other areas of care for very dysregulated children. So for every secure bed for a welfare need that comes up in this country, there are 50 children vying for it, as the presentation describes. So it's not just about mental health, it's about the whole system needs to be grown. And DfE are investing in creating more secure welfare provision. Besides us being better collaboratively, strategic at every layer, strategically and operationally, I mean, I genuinely think that's the answer. And I don't know, it has, you know, like Councillor Tilsley, I've been banging on about for 25 years too, not necessarily in Birmingham, because it's a national challenge. There is something about it joining up our commissioning intentions and pooling some budgets. But on the ground, it's absolutely about how do we free ourselves up to have conversations about children rather than policing the boundaries of our supposed responsibility. And we see that when that works, it has dramatic positive consequences. We've just got to make it work more routinely. I don't think that the fracturing of the school system has undermined cooperation. One of the things in Birmingham that had undermined cooperation for a really long time is a very poorly functioning social care service that we were hard to do business with. That's better, and we've worked hard in building relationships with our schools. So every school has a link social worker or team manager, somebody they can go to. So we've spent time trying to build those, and Jenny Turneros, my director of practice, goes to primary forums and secondary forums and spends a lot of time troubleshooting where there are issues and challenges. So I think it's less about the fracturing and more about the approach of individual head teachers that is different in different schools. And as I said, I think we do need to get to a position where we're putting various pots of money together and saying, how do we make this money work best for an identified group of children about whom we're the most concerned? Because one of the problems is more challenged and challenging and disturbed and distressed child is, the less strong we are at coming together to wrap around. So the kids who need it the most tend to get it the least, and that's what's going to change.
Thanks very much, Andy. I knew we wouldn't be able to do this session in 45 minutes because it's just too, there's just so much to hear and ask and learn from it. So I am really grateful to both of you for coming today. And a paper on the unregulated placements area would be really welcomed. And also, first look at budgets, people will think, wow, that's a huge budget. So some information around the cost of care, because we all know that it's a false economy if you don't have that preventative work going in. So just some general information would be really useful to give us a better understanding of what that money's spent on, and why it's important. I think it would be really useful. So thank you very much, both of you. And thank you also to Councillor Tilsley and Councillor Pritchard for coming along, and I hope that's been useful for you. So we are going to move on to item 6, which is our work programme. And if we look at the information for our next meeting, we have got the consultation on the Children and Young People's Plan coming to the January meeting. And Sue, I would like to request that we get some information about how the plan addresses race equality, if possible. The Birmingham Safeguarding Children's Partnership might not be able to be in attendance to the January meeting. They were supposed to be coming today and then they moved for us, but they may not be able to make it. So what I'm suggesting is that if they aren't able to join us in January, that we look at using that session for some evidence gathering for the child criminal exploitation inquiry. Because I think, that we could make some good use of that. So if Councillor Hughes and the members of the inquiry have a think about who they might like to hear from, that would be really useful. So are you happy with that suggestion, committee? Thank you. At the February meeting, we have got school attainment on the agenda. And again, I would like to ensure that we receive some information around some data really around education attainment by ethnicity. So again, if we can make that request, I'd be very happy. And then let me just check my notes. We've got the terms of reference for the child criminal exploitation. We've all had a copy of those papers, and we need to agree the work programme and agree the terms of reference for that inquiry. So is everybody happy to go ahead on that basis? Thank you very much. Item 7, which is the date of the next meeting, which is down for the 4th of January at 10 o'clock. Requests for call-in is item 8. We've had no requests for call-in. Item 9, urgent business. I haven't been made aware of any urgent business for today's meeting. And then item 10 is the usual authority to chair and officers. So do I have your authority to act in between meetings?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. So we'll now move to item 11 on the agenda, which is the Special Educational Needs and Disability Information Advice and Support Service, SENDIAS for short. And we do have a public report. So we need to note the public report, but also this is an opportunity for members to ask questions in a public session on the public report. So we, for instance, on parts of that public report, 4.2 onwards, and I'll give you an example around how SENDIAS complies with the Code of Practice. We will not be able to, in this item now, have discussions about any information that may be discussed in a private session. So just really want to ask members if you've got any questions that you wish to ask at this point. No? Thank you very much. So now we move to item 12 on the agenda, which is the exclusion of the public and press. The report, the review undertaken by the National Children's Bureau of SENDIAS has been published as an exempt item under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972. This is on the advice of the City Solicitor and Monitoring Officer on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined by paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, and point 2, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing this information. Paragraph 3 is defined as information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. And this includes information relating to the authority's own financial or business affairs. Scrutiny Committee carries out a statutory function, and government guidance recognises Scrutiny Committee's legal and democratic legitimacy in doing that. So in considering this decision before us in relation to the suggestion we carry out our scrutiny function in private, consideration needs to be given to the points that I've just gone through. So we need to consider the public interest test. We need to decide whether the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. This is a decision for the committee, but it's only elected members of this committee that can take part in a vote to move to private session. To help us make this decision, I have been advised to share the following issues with you for consideration. The review of the SENDIAS report is the property of the Improvement Board, which is chaired by John Coughlin, the DfE SEND Commissioner. The DfE Commissioner has confirmed that this is a private report and has not given the consent for the details to be placed in the public domain. The Council needs to ensure that vulnerable families are protected, and at this stage, the Improvement Board has not agreed how to engage with service users in relation to the findings set out in the report. The Council has a duty of care for SENDIAS staff who are identifiable from the report. With this in mind, committee, and as set out in the agenda, it has been recommended that members of the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the agenda item 13. Under the points that I've already gone through that I can do again, but it's quite a mouthful. So section 100A brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972. As this, I've already explained that this is a procedural matter. Sorry, there's so many words to go through here to make sure that we're doing it all correctly. So I've got to ask members, elected members of this committee, do you agree with the recommendation to move into private session?
Sorry, Chair. Just for any of the public watching, I mean, because legalities are legalities. It's very difficult for even us as elected members sometimes to grasp all the legalities of private and public, but I think as somebody who would be, I always try and speak as somebody looking in rather than somebody just sitting in the committee meeting. I think we have to bear that as a committee in mind, those that are looking in. And that's not to dumb the public down, because I'm sure there's lots of people who know far more about legal than me. I think it's worth noting for the public that when you look at exempt on a report, it isn't confidential. And when you look at that, the points you've just raised, which is a mouthful, and I'll go back to it. When you talk about that, which is let's have a look, the Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act relates to exempt. That, as you rightly say, Chair, preempts that you can actually have the scrutiny committee vote on that. So for the public's sake, whoever votes today on whether that should go in to private session or shouldn't go into private session, I think that at least that part of this meeting should be public, as in it's minuted for public purposes. So whoever votes to take private, whoever doesn't vote to take private, that should definitely be minuted down, because as part of the public aspect, I think that's a real transparent.
Yeah, just to assure you that will be, we are still in a public session.
I know, and
that we will remain in that public session.
That will
that vote.
I'll just clarify.
Yes, it will.
Who votes private and who doesn't. I think that's an important.
Yes, it will.
Somebody looking at.
Yeah. Councillor Morrell.
Thank you, Chair. Also, the point that's been raised that we need to protect members of staff who are in the review or this report. The whole point of bringing this review to scrutiny was that the members of staff at Sendias themselves get to actually scrutinise the review. And I think it's very sad that Sendias are not here today. And all we're going to be doing at this committee, whether it's public or private, is effectively talking to ourselves, because we've been doing this. I've requested this for 4 or 5 months now, since the review first came to the improvement board, which obviously I respect the confidentiality of and the nature of the SEND improvement board. But because what I said on this committee was the fact that the head of Sendias came to the SEND improvement board and wasn't given a proper opportunity to really scrutinise what was in the review. And there are serious changes happening at Sendias on the basis of this review, that if we kick the can down the road any further, by the time Sendias get to answer the questions in front of the scrutiny, it will be too late. So it's whether it's public or private or not, what we're doing right now is not what was requested. We are talking to ourselves, and what I wanted is Sendias, the staff members that you claim, that the monitoring officer is claiming she's trying to protect. We're not trying to protect them, we're trying to give them a voice. We want them in front of this committee to explain their representation of what they think of that review, which they have not had the opportunity to do. And I think that is a scandal.
Thank you, Councillor Morrell. I do share many of your frustrations. You will be aware that, I have been trying to find a way to bring Sendias to this meeting. I do want to bring in the City Solicitor, Janie Berry, just to answer your other points. If you would, Janie.
So if I may, any vote that members take now is in the public domain. You're quite right, Chair. So therefore, if it's like a show of hands of those for, against, those abstain, that will be recorded within the minutes. This meeting is also live streamed and this is recorded. So it will be there for quite a long period of time on the website for people to watch as well, to see how you voted. In terms of the issues that you've raised, as the Chair has already pointed out in quite a lengthy manner, the report is exempt at this moment in time. There is 2 definitions of a report. One is confidential. This is not a confidential report. If it was a confidential report, members would have no say in the lifting of the exemption. So that is the motion to move to exclude press and public from this meeting. This is an exempt report, hence the provisions of Schedule 12A, paragraph 3 apply, because this does directly relate to functions of the council, the business function of the council. At this moment in time, I'm fully supportive of the reasons that the Chair has set out this morning. I don't want to go into those again because they are quite lengthy, but I am fully supportive of that. At this moment in time, there is not permission to place the report in the public domain. Members do have the right to view the report in the private domain. Members can fulfil their scrutiny function and make recommendations in the private domain, and those will be shared with the Commissioner and any other relevant person that those recommendations are aimed at. In respect of Sandia staff, I'm sure I don't need to remind all councillors, but you do stand in the shoes of the employer of the organisation. You do have a duty of care to protect the interests of members of staff in all teams that we have. I'm confident that members of staff were given the opportunity to participate in the review, and from the documentation I've seen, and also following conversations with my colleague who is the statutory DCS and responsible for this service, those views have been taken into account as part of the review. However, I need to remind members that Sue Harrison, in her statutory role as the DCS, is the member of staff employed by the organisation that does have the authority to speak on the outcome of the recommendations. She's also attending here in scrutiny function and also has the ability to respond to questions in the private domain and also take back and listen to any views that you may express around this particular service, because the responsibility for delivery of improvements for this service rests with Sue in consultation and conjunction with Councillor McCarthy, who is the relevant cabinet member, who's also present here and I understand is subject to your invitation, can stay for the remainder of the meeting so that Councillor McCarthy too can hear your views, concerns and take on board any recommendations that you may have. If you choose to go, if I may,
yes, certainly,
a little bit, Chair. If you choose to vote that the meeting remains in public and therefore you do not support the request made by the Chair to go into a private session, this meeting will have to be adjourned, because as Councillor Clancy has already alluded to, this purpose of the meeting is for ensuring members of the public are appraised. And therefore, we have to comply with local government legislation, which means that I need to speak to John Coughlin, need to ascertain his views. If he does support the report going into the public domain, I have to republish the agenda for the meeting and I have to give statutory period of notice of a future date for a meeting. So it could not be that there is a short adjournment this morning, for example, whilst the report goes in the public domain, because that does not support members of the public, as Councillor Clancy has already alluded to. Does that assist, Chair?
I'm happy to have an entire meeting on this item.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Thank you for your clarification as well, Councillor Morell. So I'm going to ask again now, are members happy to go into a private session? We'll take a vote on that. So can you please indicate if you are happy to move to a private session? Okay, I think that's for the benefit of people watching at home. Are there any abstentions to that vote? So the committee have. Yeah, can you just raise your hands for me, please, committee, if you do not wish for this to go into private session. Thank you very much. So as you know, this is always going to be a difficult decision to make, and you know, I respect the committee for taking on board what has been said to them and making a decision. Our scrutiny function is really important, but members shouldn't be in a position where they feel like their hands are tied behind their back. And I do appreciate that, and I know that there have been many frustrations. I was hoping that this would allow us the opportunity to fulfil our scrutiny function and have an honest debate about the SENDIAS report. I do understand that as a scrutiny committee, we really need to be seen as being transparent and open, and the public expect that from us. As Janie Berry, our city solicitor, has said, we will now have to adjourn the meeting so that arrangements can be made in terms of working out how we can have a public session on the SENDIAS report. So I'm just asking everybody to stay in their seats while we end the meeting. But I would also like to thank committee members for coming today, and for members of the trust and officers for coming, but also to our scrutiny support team who have always and have been really very supporting in getting the arrangements for this meeting together. So thank you very much.
Yeah, so stop live stream.